So there are a lot of graphite suppliers out there and it can be a little bit confusing, so I'm going to go through my favourite suppliers when working with graphite. I'm Kirsty Rebecca and I make drawing and painting tutorials that are easy to follow even if you're just starting out. The drawing that I'm working on in the background is of an elephant using graphite. If you want to follow along with a longer real-time version of this where I talk you through every step of the process, then you can check out my Patreon channel and I'll leave a link in the description below. Now I have a lot of different suppliers and tools that I use for my graphite drawings, but I'm just going to talk about the ones that are my favourite, how I use them and why I like them so much. So I'm not going to talk too much about the basic supplies that I use, which are the graphite pencils and erasers, but I either use the Faber-Castell 9000 or the Derwent graphic pencils. But in this video, I'm going to talk about the supplies that helped me make my graphite drawings a little bit faster and a little bit better looking as well. The first supplier is the Staedtler Mars Lumograph Black in 8B. This is the darkest pencil that I found to use with graphite. This pencil actually has quite a lot of carbon in it, which makes it so dark. And I found that it's darker than any 8B or 9B graphite pencil that I've found. And a bonus to this pencil is that it has almost like a matte finish, so it's not as shiny as using those 8Bs and 9Bs in the graphite pencils. So you can get quite a dark, rich colour without having as much of that shiny result. My second favourite supply is graphite powder. So I like to use this on most of my graphite pieces because it creates a smoother result than trying to layer lighter coloured pencils on top of each other to create a smooth result. This is a much easier way of doing that. It's also much quicker and it's really great for things like backgrounds as well because you can get a nice smooth background in a quicker amount of time than you would if you were layering your normal graphite pencils. It also saves you a little bit of money because you don't have to continuously sharpen away your graphite pencils. You can just use the graphite powder without wasting any graphite basically. So I like to apply this with a brush if I want a lighter value. So I use a really soft sort of makeup brush, but you can use like a mop brush or just a really soft sort of watercolour type brush. And then I use soft tools, and that's SOFFT, to apply them if I want darker values. Those are the same tools that I use with my pastel pieces because they tend to pick up the graphite a lot more than the brush does and then also lays it down a little bit darker as well. It applies more graphite to the surface a bit more quickly. So depending on whether I want a lighter colour or a darker colour, I'll use the brush or the soft tool. I usually also keep some graphite powder in a tiny little container, which is also in a little bit of a bigger container because I find that when I use the graphite powder from the jar, I always make a mess and I'm not sure how I do it every single time, but I found that by keeping it in a smaller container, I avoid a lot of that mess. I also love using a Tombow mono eraser. So these are kind of like a mechanical pencil, but instead of the pencil lead, it's a little eraser. So I use this to erase my graphite powder or any other graphite that I've got there to create highlights, and it works really well with the graphite powder. If you lay a layer of graphite powder down over your entire piece, like I've done with this elephant, you can erase sections to create highlights rather than trying to draw around those highlight areas. So it's almost like drawing in lighter areas, but you're using an eraser to do that. It's also really great for smaller details like hair, fur, or whiskers. Before I share my next favourite supply, if you want to follow along with my longer real-time tutorials where I talk you through every step of the process, then Patreon might be the solution for you. For a small amount per month, you'll have access to every tutorial that I've previously uploaded on your chosen tier level in a variety of mediums like pastel, coloured pencil, graphite, watercolour and more. You will also have access to the original reference photo, a traceable outline, and a list of supplies that I'm using so you really can follow along every step of the way. My tutorials don't skip any stages or cut out any important parts of the process, and I will share all of my secrets to help you improve. Every month, I will upload brand new tutorials to the library so you can grow and develop your drawing and painting skills and take your art to the next level. You can also join in on our members chat group where you can ask questions or advice or share your artwork and talk to other members in the Patreon community. The link is in the description if you want to check it out. So my next favorite supply is a toned paper. So sometimes I do just work on white paper, but I really love working on a toned paper for a few different reasons. So whether it's a smooth paper like the Strathmore toned, which is what I'm using here for this elephant, or any other type of mid-tone paper like the Clairefontaine pastel mat is really nice to use. Using a toned paper will really help make your drawings pop. When you work on white paper, you have to work your way up from light to dark, so basically working around your highlights so that you can keep them crisp and white. You can erase the graphite on white paper to get a highlighted area, but sometimes it doesn't get back to that white of the paper. An easier way to work is to start out with a mid-tone colour where you can go lighter or darker than the original colour of the paper. So you don't have to preserve your highlights like you do on white paper. You can actually use other mediums to add the white highlights instead, which brings me to my next supply, which is white coloured pencil. This is a really easy way to add in your highlights on a toned paper. Because the paper is a mid-tone, your white will show up as well as darker colours. So I like to use the Caran d'Ache Luminance white, but you can use any white coloured pencil that you have to create these highlights. You could also use a tinted graphite pencil, so you could use a white tinted graphite. I think Derwent makes some that are quite good if you wanted to stick with graphite, but I find that the white coloured pencil shows up quite nicely. The white pencil also works a lot better on the Clairefontaine pastel mat, which is more of a textured paper than this Strathmore toned, but it still works quite well on the Strathmore as well. My next favourite supply is a blending stump or cotton tips. So I always like to blend out my layers before I go into another layer. It blends out the graphite a little bit softer and there's a little bit less pencil strokes. It also helps push the graphite into the tooth of the paper. And so what I mean by the tooth is that every paper that you work on sort of has like hills and valleys, and when you come across the top with your pencil, it catches on the hills and then deposits into the valleys. The more layers that you add, the more it will fill up the valleys and eventually become level with the hills. And that's when you can't add any more pencil to your paper. So by blending it with a cotton tip or a blending stump, you're actually pushing it into those little valleys of the paper, allowing you to add some more layers on top as well. And again, the blending works a little bit better on the pastel mat because of how many layers you can add because of the amount of tooth that that paper has, but it still works on the Strathmore paper as well. So I always blend my graphite anyway. Another good thing about blending stumps is that if you keep them dirty, like you don't clean off the excess graphite that's on them, you can actually use that to apply graphite to lighter areas for a bit of a smoother application than using a light graphite pencil. My seventh favourite supply is a mechanical pencil. So I used to sharpen my pencils all the time to get a fine point for those fine little details, but I found that when you continuously sharpen your pencil, you're obviously wasting a lot of your pencil and the point gets dull quite quickly. Whereas if you use a mechanical pencil, the lead is always sharp, obviously, and it's always detailed and there's a lot less wastage that way. So I use that for a lot of the detail areas just to get a nice crisp line, and it's really great for things like fur detail or hair or whiskers. So those are my favourite suppliers. They're not the only suppliers that I use, but they're the ones that I definitely go to the most when I'm working on graphite drawings. I've got a playlist on the screen of some other graphite and charcoal tutorials that I thought you might find useful, so click on that and I'll see you over there.